as our host to introduce our speaker, Christine.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Afternoon, everybody. This is Jenny Marr, supervising engineer with the Department of Water Resources. I apologize, you'll have to take my word for it. My camera is not working today. I am very happy to be here to kick off this LunchMAR and introduce Christine. Since the release of the Governor's Water Supply Strategy in August 2022, the department's been providing technical assistance to local agencies looking to use floodwater for managed aquifer recharge. As part of this technical assistance, we saw a need for a tool that could provide relevant information in one location to facilitate diversion of floodwater for recharge and answer such questions as when and where diversions could occur. This tool could support local agencies and individuals diverting water under new water rights or outside the water rights process, kind of based on that local flood condition. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work with Christine for the past couple of years on the San Joaquin Valley LunchMAR dashboard. Christine Gutierrez is a water resources planner with GEI Consultants, Inc. She has experience in environmental policy, ecology, and sustainable water management. With her work in California, she's primarily focused on groundwater and floodwater management. Some of you may remember Christine from her presentation about the early planning and concepts for the dashboard at the 2023 LunchMAR Public Forum. The tool has come a long way since then, and we are excited to share it with you today. So please take it away, Christine.
Thanks, Jenny. Let me just quickly pull up my screen. All right. So as Jenny said, I'm Christine Gutierrez. I'm with GEI Consultants, and I'm one of the project managers for the San Joaquin Valley LunchMAR dashboard. Also on today's call, which I'll call him out, Larry Rodriguez. He's another project manager with GEI on this project, and he'll be participating at the end with the Q&A part of our presentation. We are going to save all questions until the end of the presentation. And Jenny will be monitoring the chat in case anything pertinent comes up. She may flag me down midway. And before we get started, I also wanted to do a big thanks to our project team. We have a huge group of people working on this, from software engineers, hydrologists, geologists, and water resource planners with GEI. And a big thanks to our local agencies who have also provided a ton of information and data to help support our efforts in this dashboard. So with that, we'll jump right in. Okay, there it goes. 1 second, having a little bit of technical difficulties. All right. So the initial concept of the dashboard, like Jenny said, came from Water Code 1242.1, which in summary states that diversions do not require a permit if a local flood agency would define flood flows in an adopted plan, gives public notification of a flood threat. So following the early diversions under the executive orders in 2023 and the subsequent water code legislation, oops, sorry, my computer is not working. Go back one. So like I was saying, after those early diversions in 2023 and the subsequent water code implementation, we did recognize that there was a need for increased system-wide coordination to maximize potential recharge, essentially identifying when and where diversions can take place, and who or what agency is responsible for providing that public notification. So to assist in facilitating diversions, the dashboard was created with 2 primary functions. The first function being an integrated flood forecasting tool for agencies and diverters to facilitate diversion of floodwaters for groundwater recharge. So essentially, again, identifying where and when diversions can occur. The second being an overarching resource for all things flood management and flood emergency response operations. And we'll get into how each of these functions are carried out in the dashboard in today's presentation. So to carry out these functionalities, we identified several objectives for the dashboard. A couple of those objectives, we wanted to identify the local flood agency, so who's responsible for identifying those threats and making that public notification, present agency identified flood thresholds, such as Water Code 1242.1 flood flows, but we are also including other identified flood thresholds, such as the CNRFC flood thresholds, and maybe other state directives that your agency might comply with. Provide secondary means of diversion notification, identify where eligible flood conditions may be occurring, provide flood forecast capabilities, and flood management and groundwater recharge resources. So with this information, the overarching goal of the dashboard will be for local agencies to utilize the existing tools and resources within the dashboard to help facilitate floodwater diversions for groundwater recharge. So the dashboard development, early on, we recognized the importance of agency collaboration, and we focused a lot on outreach to local agencies to collect the information that I previously discussed on the last slide. And this included 8 interviews with over 10 agencies held to date. We are still conducting interviews, so if you are a local agency that is interested in sharing information, please feel free to reach out. We have met with several local management agencies, both on the county and city level. We've met with several groundwater sustainability agencies and a couple of the county Office of Emergency Services. And more recently, we've held countywide webinars to engage local agencies in using the tool and beta testing it with them as well. So as with any initiative, LunchMAR does not exist without challenges. From early interviews, we learned that there are a lot of data gaps from our objectives that we've identified. And so a few of those data gaps, in summary, not all agencies have established flood thresholds. Not all areas have an agency responsible for notifying a flood threat. A lot of areas are still trying to figure out, who holds that responsibility and what areas of the county are the county's responsibility versus a local flood management agency. Not all streams have flood forecast or gauging stations, which are a big part of our ability to manage those flows and divert accurately. Not all agencies have a flood plan or a general plan that considers flood threat. And I think this is especially the case with the Water Code 1242.1. A lot of agencies are still trying to figure out, how to establish those flood thresholds and what type of planning document to create to be able to implement those diversions. So there's also a variation of needs throughout the system. It's not a one size fits all. In some areas, flood is largely managed, whether that be by irrigation districts, counties, or flood management agencies. In other areas, again, not so much. They're trying to still figure out the jurisdictional authorities, GSAs that are willing to participate in diversions, and so on. And then the last thing that largely varies, as many of you may know, is the recharge potential within the watershed. So we see the greatest potential being in the upper watershed and the lowest near the delta, which is largely a result of land availability and the increased importance of pulling water off the system in the upper portion versus the lower. So we are working on bridging the gap through outreach to local management agencies. And this is part of today's presentation, is presenting it to all of you in hopes that, a couple of you might be local agencies that have that jurisdictional authority and want to provide that information. So getting into the functionalities of the dashboard, excuse me, there are 2 primary ways flood conditions can be displayed in the dashboard, the first being cross sections. So cross sections are the main resource or indicator in the dashboard to help facilitate these diversions. And each cross section is populated with local flood management information. So you'll see on the screen here, we have some flood contact information for Lower San Joaquin Levee District, and local flood thresholds as well, if provided or available. We also have current elevation for each cross section, which is calculated based on flow from the nearest CDEC gauge and the latest LiDAR data from our CV Fed 2.0 model. So the goal is to have each cross section populated with local flood management information that we collect through our outreach efforts. We do still have a lot of information that we want to include on the dashboard. So if you are a representative from an agency and come across an area without information in your jurisdiction as you test out the dashboard, please reach out to myself or a member of our team. You'll see as you kind of explore the cross sections and our other flood indicator status points that a lot of this information is a data gap. Like I said, agencies are still trying to figure out how to establish 1242.1 flood flows. And so that's a huge information gap that we're working on obtaining. So again, if you're an agency that has that and would like to provide that, please reach out. And as that information is obtained, we will be routinely updating the cross sections so that information is available not only for the flood agency, but for local diverters who are interested in pulling water off the system during those flood events. So the second way flood conditions are presented in the dashboard are through what we call local flood threshold points. And these points are utilized where cross-section data gaps are present. These data gaps are a result of inadequate LiDAR data due to subsidence, mainly in the upper portion of the system. GEI is currently working with DWR to obtain updated data in that portion of the system, but that data will likely not be available for another 2 years. So until then, until the new data is available and can be integrated, points will be used to indicate flood conditions on their respective system. And these points, just like cross sections, they'll include identified local flood thresholds, flood jurisdictional authority, and it will change and allow diverters to know whether or not diversions can occur. So diversion eligibility, which is obviously a huge part of this. In summary, both cross sections and local flood threshold points are used to visually indicate diversion eligibility, but they are solely reliant on agency notification. So we do not activate any part of the system for diversion eligibility until we receive that agency public notification, which we have a feature within the dashboard, which we'll demo for you here shortly. But essentially, when an agency submits proof of public notification, we can go in and activate a reach or multiple reaches in the dashboard to visually represent where those flood conditions are occurring. And that's shown here on the screen by the green graphic. And a few parameters that are required for us to make that notification. We do request a copy of that public notification, whether that be per Water Code 1242.1 or another directive such as an executive orders, as Jenny mentioned, the recent one that was released last week. We also require diversion source, time period, and the area in which diversions are eligible. And we do have a certification statement at the end. So we only accept the information from local agencies with that jurisdictional authority as well. Additionally, the second function of the dashboard is to serve as a database for all things operation and our flood operation and management. So essentially, we wanted to create a one-stop shop for regional flood management that integrates local, state, and federal data and information. I'm sure, as most of you may know, there's a ton of information out there, but it's all scattered across various platforms, which are great. But in an emergency or when you're developing permit applications, it's nice to have all that information in one spot. And so that was kind of our vision with the dashboard, is making it as easy and streamlined as possible for agencies to utilize. So an example of a few of the data sets that we have in the dashboard, groundwater recharge suitability. So as shown on the slide here, we have the UC Davis SAGB layers in there, both the modified and unmodified. We also include links for additional information on each of these data layers. So if you want to go to the original source, you can. We also have FEMA flood zones, location of diversion points, which is great for planning for the local agencies. If a flood event is occurring and they need to know where they can pull water off the system, having those points readily available is really helpful. We also have equipment and material resource locations, so temporary pump vendors, land clearing services, We're also in the process of obtaining emergency response plans. So we have a couple of the FAIRX plans for the San Joaquin Valley in the system already, and a couple local documents that have been provided by agencies. But the goal of this one is really to identify those 1242.1 flood flow plans. And then lastly, we do have contact information for all the flood management and emergency operations agencies. And there are plenty more data sets, but like I said, if you go through and look at it and you see a data set, or you have a data set that may be useful, that's not in there, that you think would be helpful, we would love to have that in our possession and maybe possibly put that on the dashboard for public use as well. So with that, we'll do a quick preview of the dashboard, just to give everyone an idea of what the process looks like for that. So the public notification is pretty straightforward. And eventually we are going to develop, oops, is that paused? Sorry. So we are in the process of developing different user permission levels to allow the agencies themselves to go in and activate areas for diversion eligibility. But until those are developed, it is on myself or someone at GEI to help facilitate this public notification. So as a local agency, you would go under the guest view currently to utilize this form. In the future, we're hoping to set up user accounts where you can do this on your end and kind of cut out like the administrative middleman. So pretty straightforward. We're just providing some personal information here. We do request the diversion start date and end date. This just allows us to automatically toggle on and off those diversion eligibility areas on our end. We also request the diversion area. If you don't know the river mile start or end, you can use our map viewer function, click on the various cross sections, and they will give you that mile point for you. So you can just easily pull that over. Diversion source, and like I said, we do require that proof of public notification. So whether that be a link to a website displaying that notification, an attachment, or a copy of an email distribution, that is required and the form will not be submitted without that. And then we have a second option here. This is optional. If you are a local agency that is providing or has a local plan that they want to provide that's not already in the dashboard, this is an opportunity for you to provide that data. And lastly, the certification. We can hit submit. And then our second demo is just showing you what it looks like on our end and how we toggle on and off those diversion areas, which again will be extended for local agency use at some point in the near future. So under our flood management tab, we can view those public notifications that were submitted. We also received this through our Outlook emails. So they're routed in two ways, but we've received a notice instantaneously. We can go into the system, view what you had previously submitted, and then we can enter it on our end. So clicking on the flood management tab again, there is an area for us to edit local flood notifications. And this is essentially a database of all of our cross sections and local flood threshold points, which again, if it's extended to the agency, you'd be assigned those within your jurisdiction. So we're just entering what has been provided on the public notification form. And a feature that is not on here that we are currently adding is that start and end date. So we don't have to manually go into the system and turn it off on the day that diversions are to commence. And again, if you don't know the bound points, you can utilize our map viewer to obtain those from the cross sections. And once that is submitted, our system updates and you can click on the map viewer. Zoom into the area where diversion was notified, and you can see by that green feature that this area is now eligible for diversion, which is indicated by the local flood notification made. So that is the dashboard in a nutshell. We are currently in our beta testing period. We started that in early December with small groups of local agencies from each county. They're currently testing the dashboard itself. But we are looking for, broad wealth of information, whether that be flood thresholds, if you have gauging stations within your jurisdiction that aren't publicly available or that we don't have in our system that you could provide for our system, we welcome those as well. And any data and information that were data sets or updated information would be helpful as well. So our beta testing is through March of 2025, and following that period, we will be doing several rounds of revision and continued development, adding in those functionalities such as the agency user permissions, as I mentioned. And then our goal is to have it publicly available for implementation in October of 2025. So we're hoping to have the dashboard ready for public use this next water year. So we will be sending out a link to the dashboard in the next few days for all of you to test. And we highly encourage your feedback. It's very important for us. A lot of the information we have in there right now is what's publicly available. The information that is hard to obtain, such as the flood thresholds, a lot of planning documents aren't publicly available. So we highly encourage that type of information. We're also interested in your feedback on the dashboard itself and its functionalities. So there are a couple ways to submit feedback. You can email us directly at the email on the screen here, or you can email us through the dashboard. Similar to the public notification form, there is a contact us feature in the dashboard. You can email us directly through there, which I definitely encourage because it tests out our communication platform. So definitely provide that feedback if you're interested. And if you want to contact myself or Jenny or Larry Rodriguez, maybe set up one-on-one meetings or want to provide direct information to us, our contact information is available as well. So that's the end of our presentation today. We can open it up for questions at this point, and I will actually jump back one screen in case anyone wants to jot down the dashboard information.
Thanks, Christine. I see one question in the chat and encourage folks to add their questions there, or feel free to come off of mute to ask questions about the dashboard. Is there a plan to expand the dashboard to the Sacramento Valley?
Yes, so we are actually drafting that right now as we speak. Our plan is to replicate this dashboard for Sacramento Valley. We have a draft that's under internal review right now, and we're hoping to push that out into the year for beta testing.
Does the dashboard include delta conditions?
Yes, we currently have a link for the delta conditions. We're in the process of modifying it to be able to display the real-time delta conditions. So rather than having to click a link, taking you to a separate page where you can view those conditions, we're working on like a little widget within the dashboard, so you can view that in real time.
How does the dashboard show flood forecasts?
So the flood forecast, we have the CNRFC flood forecast, and I can actually, Jenny, if it's okay with you, I can pull up the dashboard itself.
Yeah, of course. I was kind of
Okay.
hoping you would.
I can, let me just pull it
That
up.
was my question. I was like, oh, that'd be interesting to see. I wish that we had the Sacramento ready to go because people could actually see how
Yeah.
the colors change based on flood forecast, because it's still all yellow in the San Joaquin.
Yeah, and I think the reason we started with the San Joaquin was in 2023, most of the flooding was occurring in the San Joaquin.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because now that we have an actual dashboard to test, all of the major weather issues are occurring in the Sacramento. So definitely funny how things work out.
And if anyone wants to play along, I'm going to put a link to the beta version of the dashboard in the chat as well. Maybe it'll inspire some questions.
So, and this is actually a great exercise because A few tips and tricks for the dashboard. If you're on a VPN, sometimes some of the data layers, because they're so intense and large, depending if you're on your company VPN or personal VPN, security issues may delay or even prevent some of the layers from popping up. So if you're having that issue, I suggest jumping off the VPN. And also, since the data layers are so large, they sometimes take a while to load. So this is a great example on my screen right now. What's not showing up that should be showing up are the cross sections. Again, this is a huge data set that we have in the system, so it takes a few minutes to populate. But to answer the question previously, we do have several forecasting points from CNRFC that are updated in real time, as shown on the screen here. So you can click on those and view that real-time information. We are making several updates in the system. So for example, current estimated flow, that's something that they're working on right now. But that's going to estimate the flow based off of our elevation that's on our cross sections. Maybe while the cross sections load, is there any other questions?
Yeah, I see Annette raised her hand. Feel free to come off mute, Annette.
Yeah, thank you. This was great. I may have missed this, and I'm sure it's been talked about before, but what is the target audience for this dashboard? Or the main audience and purpose?
So the main purpose is to help facilitate diversions for groundwater recharge. So we're mainly targeting local flood agencies who have that authority to notify of that threat. So that would, the primary use would be by them to use it as more of a public notification platform. The secondary user would be the diverters, who would be interested in diverting that water for groundwater recharge. But we also have a ton of different resources. So if you're interested in applying for a permit to divert water, and you're looking for those resources to help your application, we have that in store as well.
Okay, and so it's a lot of like real-time data. They want really like, because I'm thinking of data layers to suggest, right? So I'm not sure. Actually, I haven't figured out what I'm trying to ask specifically, but in thinking of data layers that may be useful, is there a specific type of timeline, I guess, like how updated the data needs to be, if it being 2 years in the past because of update times, if that wouldn't be useful? I'm just trying to gauge that, if that makes sense. This one isn't a specific question, but if there's any insight provided there, it can help me better understand what might be useful to suggest.
Yeah, so it depends on the data sets that you're maybe thinking about. But obviously the latest and greatest is the best data. So if that's 2 years old data, it's still useful for our dashboard. The types of data we're looking for pertain to like flood management and emergency response operations. And I can click through a few of the layers. We do have a flood preparedness resource tab. With the flood agency contacts. Again, we have those temporary pump land clearing services, rock and sandbag calculators. We have channel capacities, emergency response plans. Basically anything related or pertinent to flood management is what we're looking for. But we're also looking for data that helps with groundwater recharge as well, which is why we have like the UC Davis SAGV layer in there to identify, suitable lands for recharge. So anything that helps facilitate that process is what we're looking for. And maybe Jenny, do you have anything to add to that, or Larry?
Yeah.
Walk me through?
If you don't mind, I'll jump in a little.
Absolutely.
And there was a question in the chat too about audience and uses. Really, the dashboard concept kind of predated the EO and kind of the flood events of 2023. And so one of the original concepts for use of the dashboard was to provide flood information to GSAs. And so, GSAs or local public agencies that were looking to do maybe temporary or new water rights based on the board's streamlined methodology, we wanted to give them a place to put some flood information on, existing flood forecast points and what the various, operational stages are, if it's, a monitor stage or a minimum, a minor flood stage, moderate flood stage, etc., and provide as much information that's available right now, and then identify gaps of where that information doesn't exist but could exist at the local level, and ask people to bring more flood information into the tool for GSAs. And then as we had the events of 2023, the executive order was released, and people were doing diversions and trying to look at local flood conditions. And one of those requirements was the local notification. Most of those went out on listservs or on websites, and we thought it'd be helpful to also have a tool where a potential diverter in an area that thought had local flood conditions could get on the tool, type in their address, and see if a local diversion notification had been made in their area. Something they could simply, type in their address and see if their area is green or yellow. And as we're developing the dashboard, and water code section 1242.1 is now on the books. We want it to have the dashboard help local agencies operationalize the requirements in 1242.1, which is very similar, of course, to the executive order, with a couple additional requirements like Delta operations. And so, as Christine said, we have a widget we plan on adding that shows Delta operations. Right now, it's a useful link. So, anyone who's looking to make diversions under 1242.1 should be able to get all the information that they need to make those decisions of, can I make these types of diversions? Do I have a local threshold in my area? And allows us to help do a gap analysis to see, what locals we can be working with to see if, local thresholds can be developed.
Okay, thank you so much.
I see a few more questions in the chat. I see one question on forecasting storage and flow and what models are used. I actually think that would be a fabulous topic for a future LunchMAR. I don't think we've done a presentation from our hydrologists and team of forecasters, either from the California Nevada River Forecast Center or others in DWR that do flood forecasting. So I think that's a great future topic. We're pulling on existing information, so it's others who are doing that work that is just informing this tool. So I'm gonna punt that to a future presentation idea. And I see Camiar has a couple questions in here. Can the data sets be hosted on the California Natural Resources Agency open data portal? We haven't thought about, since we're still in the beta testing phases, when that might happen, but certainly most of the data that is informing, all the data that's informing the dashboard is publicly available GIS data or information from the California Nevada River Forecast Center. And then Christine, I'll ask this of you. Does the dashboard include a feature to track the volume of recharge from floodwater diversions?
It does not currently. This is something I think we've talked about a little bit. These diversions are required to be reported. So we are tracking, where those diversions are occurring and obtaining data from those reports. And maybe in the future, that's something that we look at tracking and displaying. But that's something that we don't have currently.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that, diversions that have been made and reported to the water board, either related to the 2023 executive order or diversions that will be made under 1242.1. We are taking that information and loading it into the dashboard, at least as far as where those diversions have been made.
Yeah, but I think it would be great in the future to be able to track, that
Yeah.
volume of water. I think there's been a lot of conversations from, state all the way to the local on how to track that water, and how best to present that data. And I think what we're hoping to obtain from agencies are, how do they track that, especially the GSAs? And would they be interested in seeing something like that in the dashboard to help them track, what's going on in their basin? And how much water is pulling off the system. So definitely a future feature that we're hoping to be able to develop.
And I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I don't see any hand raises either. So we'll pause for a moment to see if anybody has any last minute questions or still formulating questions. Well, Christine, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts. I might add, just a reminder, we are beta testing the dashboard. So, we know there's gaps in local flood threshold information. We're really hoping that this will spur local activity to develop those thresholds, or if they exist already, to provide them to the dashboard team so we can get as much information as is available or will be available into the dashboard, to enhance its function and usability, valley-wide. And so we invite you to share any comments, questions, modifications, suggestions, either to myself or Christine or through the dashboard itself. There's a link to contact us, as Christine had mentioned in the presentation. So I'm not sure, Christine, if you had any closing conversation or closing remarks. And Megan, is it all right if we wrap up early?
Okay with me.
Yeah, Jenny, I think that was really well said. And I encourage everyone to look at it, whether or not you're an agency or a potential diverter. I still think it's a really great resource for flood management and planning, or anything that is related to that realm. So definitely take a glance at it at the very least. And we'll send out some instructions on how to submit that feedback as well.
Excellent.
And then Megan Camier suggested if there's a link sent out to the LunchMAR network with the recording, if a request can also be added to help beta test the dashboard.
Sure, we can absolutely do that. And we can send that out in our next update email, which will probably be in a few weeks. But we can add that to the recording, absolutely. Great. Thanks, Christine.
Yeah,
Really
thank you for having
exciting.
me.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see how robustly this gets developed and utilized. So excellent work. Thanks everyone for joining today. We will catch you next time in a month from now. Happy February.
Thanks all. Take care.
Bye.